Yes,
I think,
Jonathan.
I think one of the interesting things that came out of our conference today was the concept that the FIDIC Silver Book, even though it's denominated as a lump sum turnkey, so obviously the idea is very high risk for the contractor. Actually, the idea came out that actually it's quite a soft contract. Did you pick up on that?
Absolutely. I think there was a theme, I think, today, and it was quite an important theme, that even though when you look at the Silver Book and you can see that there's no engineer and you think that you're facing, therefore, the wrath of the employer, you're dealing with the employer, that within the Silver Book there are important qualifications as to the lump sum principle. And I think these are, for example, our force majeure, for example, where the risk remains with the employer.
It seems to me it's wide open, isn't it?
It's wide open.
And you get time and money, which is very unusual in my experience. Very unusual. But I still think what's come out today is a big issue is the time bar under clause 20.1, and that is a problem, I think, for a lot of contractors.
Well, it's very harsh, isn't it? But,
Yeah.
as we were hearing earlier, that the other speakers were saying that depending on which jurisdiction you're contracting within, don't necessarily assume that the time bar does what it says on the tin.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a tendency by the employer to think that if the contractor had missed the time bar, then he's off the hook, but that's often not the case.
No, that's right. So it's a question of expectations.
Completely. I think that it's important that to look at the applicable law, because the applicable law may modify the harshness of clause 20.1. Even under English law, arguably Gaymark, an important Australian decision, may modify when it comes to extensions of time any failure to put in a notice. So I think in fact the Silver Book has some potentially not gaping holes, I would say, but some important qualifications.
Yeah. So, Chris, do you see that in practice being plugged?
I think so. I think also for me, the Silver Book does have areas where it just leaves the detail to be filled out by the parties. And I think one of the biggest areas for me, and what I deal in a lot of, is in the insurances and how the parties regulate risks between themselves and an insurer. And that's a lot of time and effort that I think we spend with insurers and with funders working out through the risks that the parties are going to pass on to insurers. So,
because every owner comes with its insurance program, and it will be different from project to project.
I think so.
But your contract will have to change for that.
I think so. And also, for example, the financial security that's given by the contractor. I mean, that is left really open for the parties to agree. And again, we all know that the banks all have their own form of bonds. They all want to be on-demand bonds, whereas FIDIC really is a performance type default bonds, and so again that's another area where there's a lot of debate and negotiation.
And then if your bond company loses its AAA rating or whatever its required credit status is, again FIDIC doesn't expressly deal with that, but you normally expect that to be a default position.
Well, completely, and it's often actually the detail is often missed out. For example, when you deal with things like obtaining a letter of credit, for example, by the employer, and it says, for example, a first rate bank, for example, is to provide the confirmation. That often could mean that significant funds should be paid by the employer in respect to that. And often people do not think about these detailed nuts and bolts issues, and they are not covered. And that's why it's important actually to evaluate in detail each of these clauses and how they really fit in with the project.
Absolutely.
I think that's right, and that vacuum in the drafting, I think, then allows the client to bring to bear, under the current commercial climate, more risk that he passes on to the contractor.
So I think what we were saying to the audience today was about, in terms of EPC contracts, is that there's a whole range of issues that need to be addressed. The FIDIC Silver Book addresses quite a few of them, but because of market risks, the transfer of risk will have to be dealt with within a set of contract conditions, possibly particular conditions, but you might end up actually amending the text itself.
Well, I think FIDIC recognises some of these in the particular conditions it puts in the back of put it back in the Silver Book, but I guess in terms of risk transfer, as Ray was saying, the devil's in the detail, so because it's not dealt with in such great detail, then it allows the parties to negotiate that themselves, and in the current climate, I think the employer tends to have the upper hand.
I think one important point to mention in terms of the risk from the contractor's perspective, and I think the lesson again and again is to try and manage, reduce and mitigate the risk through complying with contractual procedures, ensuring your documents are fully in order, and abiding by the machinery of the contract. That is an absolutely clear message. And of course, the due diligence that you should do properly right at the beginning.
Sure. So, good projects, they come about from a whole range of issues.
Yes.
Clarity of understanding in terms of the contract, risk mitigation, and understanding risks.
Absolutely, right from the beginning.
If you don't identify them, then you can't manage them.
Exactly.
And I think FINIC does that pretty well.
It does do pretty well. I think it remains a fantastic platform for both contractors and employers, and probably a starting point where you need to really tailor it at the end of the day for the particular project and its risks.
Yeah.
That's right.